Socio-economic Issues. Now, let's take a minute to read the following quotes and then infer what they mean. The first one is, when our economy is truly healthy and everyone rises with the tide of prosperity, then issues such as the lack of affordable housing, homelessness, and hunger are greatly diminished. When our economy is truly healthy, when our economy is truly good, and everyone rises with the tide of prosperity and everyone is gaining out of this good economy, then issues like lack of affordable housing, homelessness, and hunger are greatly diminished. This quote highlights the importance of a good economy in not only attaining prosperity, but also ending social problems like lack of affordable housing, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, poverty, and many others. The second quote is, economic development cannot take a nation forward on its own. So here they're telling you that economic development is not enough alone. We need a society and economy which complement each other. We need to take care of the poor, deprived, and left behind sections of society. So, in other words, here they're telling you that in order to have a good economy, you have to have a good society as well. You have to have a healthy society, a healthy community. So, this quote sheds light on the importance of providing a proper environment to achieve sustainable economic development, for society and economy complement each other. For instance, economic growth would be a far-fetched goal if the society was rife or full of corruption. So we all encounter words like economics and economy in our daily life or day-to-day life, but there are only a few people who can actually define and differentiate these two. Let's check the following images to come up with a definition for economy and economics. If you notice here in this picture, you have a factory and it says producers, and then you have a group of people and it says consumers, and it seems that there's a kind of transaction here. The consumers are buying products and then the producers are selling products and sometimes buying products to produce more products. And this is basically economy. It is the large set of interrelated production and consumption activities that aid in determining how scarce resources are allocated. Meanwhile, when it comes to economics, as you notice here in the picture, it says it is the production, distribution, and use of goods and services, and it's basically a study. So it's the study of production, distribution, and use of goods and services. So basically, economics is a social science concerned with the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Now, as you read the following types of economies, try to deduce which one is the best for sustainable economic development and growth. As you can notice, we have different types of economies. We have the market-based economy, we have the command-based economy, and we have the green economy. Now, the market-based economy is controlled by the supply and demand, so it allows goods to flow freely through the market according to the supply and demand. Consumers and producers decide what is bought and what is sold, and the law of supply and demand impact or influence the price. So, if there's a supply shortage, there would be an increased demand, and the increased demand would increase the prices. Meanwhile, when it comes to the command-based economies, here it is dependent on a central political agent which controls the price and distribution of goods. Meanwhile, when it comes to green economies often depend on renewable, sustainable forms of energy, like the solar energy, for example. They operate with the aim of providing consumption and production while cutting carbon emission, restoring biodiversity, relying on alternative energy sources, and preserving the environment. They also focus on technological innovations that increase energy efficiencies. So, which one of those is the best for sustainable economic development and growth? Of course, it's basically the green economies, because those are best for the environment, where They depend on renewable, sustainable forms of energy, and they aim at providing consumption and production while cutting down on carbon emissions and preserving the environment. And this serves the UN's SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what are some major economic problems that we need to be aware of? The first one is recession, and recession is a period of temporary economic decline during which trade and industrial activity are reduced with a fall in the GDP, or the gross domestic product growth, okay? This exacerbates unemployment, or makes unemployment even worse, and makes inequality even worse within the community. We also have inflation, and inflation is the general increase in prices and the fall in purchasing value of money. So when the prices are increasing, you are no longer able to afford consuming as much as you used to consume earlier. And this would influence the spending power. It would decrease the spending power, and it would create confusion for firms and companies, making them cut back on investment and spending. So they would start spending less, and eventually it's going to lead to unemployment as well. We have volatile prices, and those cause swings in economic fortunes. For example, if you have a lot of supply in agricultural markets, for example, a lot of supply of tomatoes, more than what was expected, then the prices would drop. And this fall in the price would cause a lower revenue for farmers, and it would make them go out of business because they would have to sell their crops for less than they were supposed to sell them for. We have a deflation, and deflation is the general decline in prices of goods and services. It influences the consumers because they would be able to buy and purchase more goods and services, but at the same time it can harm borrowers, and it would lead to bankruptcies, economic depression, and unemployment. Another problem is unemployment, where some people would not be skilled enough for the job market. Some would be laid off because of recession and because of deflation. Some might be laid off because of wars, and there are plenty of reasons for unemployment, and we will discuss this later on. But basically, this leads to wasting resources and causes stress, alienation, low income, and feelings of failure. Another problem is inequality and poverty. We have monopoly, where firms gain monopoly power, setting high prices to consumers and making high benefits at consumers' expense, causing social inequality. And we are seeing this often now in Lebanon, where out of a sudden you would find that a product is no longer on the shelf, and then out of a sudden you would find it at a much higher price, and you would be forced to pay that price to be able to buy that good. Finally, you have the credit crunch, and it's an economic condition in which investment capital is hard to secure as an extension of recession. So out of a sudden, you would notice that there's a tightening of condition to be able to obtain a loan from the bank. Now, what are some additional economic problems and issues? We have debt. We have public debt, which is how much a country owes to lenders outside of itself, and external debt, which is the amount owed to foreign investors by both the government and the private sector. Now, how can we solve this? First of all, we have to rationalize our spending. We have to raise domestic resource mobilization. We have to improve tax collection, fight tax evasion, reform all sectors, including electricity sector in Lebanon, and we have a series of growth-oriented measures that should aim to improve the overall business environment. Regarding taxes, we have direct taxes, we have indirect taxes, and our taxes are usually either proportional or progressive, and now we're going to know what each of them means. The direct taxes include the income tax. Those are equitable because they are levied according to the taxable capacity of people. They are economical because the cost of collecting them is low. There's an element of certainty because taxpayers know how much they are going to pay, at what time they are going to pay the taxes. So they know how much they're going to pay and at what time they're going to pay this amount of money. There's elasticity because it varies according to the needs of the government and changes in the income of the people. It has an element of productivity because the collection charges of those taxes are very low. And that's a source, an important source for the government revenue. Finally, it increases civic sense because people would be conscious of the fact that they are paying taxes for the government. Meanwhile, the disadvantages of direct taxes are first, the fact that they are evadable because sometimes a person might submit false returns of income. They would not be honest about how much they are receiving as an income, and as such, they would pay less taxes than they are expected to or than they should be paying. There's also the issue of being the disincentive, reducing the desire to work and save because they would demotivate people. Indirect taxes include the VAT. We all know that we're paying VAT for the products that we buy from supermarkets and stores. So those are convenient because they are mostly levied on commodities and are paid by consumers when they buy them in the market. They are equitable in the sense that they are paid by all the sections of the community at the time of making purchases of goods and in the form of sales tax or customs duty. They are productive and elastic because governments can secure an adequate income from them, an income that increases with the increase in population and production within the country. They are socially desirable because they are levied on intoxicants like wine or opium and serve as a great a great social purpose by limiting the consumption of such harmful commodities. There's no possibility of evasion because they are collected in the form of higher prices of goods sold to consumers, and there's a wide coverage by being imposed on a large variety of goods so that most people contribute to the revenue of the government. Meanwhile, when it comes to the disadvantages, they are regressive because they are not equitable as they are regressive in nature, affecting the poor more than the rich man because a commodity tax imposed on food, for example, will affect a poor family to a much greater degree than a rich family. It's uncertain because the increase in the price of the commodity due to the tax might cause a decline in demand. There's an absence of civic consciousness since taxpayers do not feel that they are paying a tax while purchasing a commodity, so the taxes do not promote civic consciousness. It's uneconomical because the cost of collection is quite heavy, where every source of production has to be guarded and large administrative staff is required to administer such taxes. Finally, it's inflationary because the imposition of indirect taxes on commodities increases their market prices, and this raises the cost of living and a demand in the wages of the worker, generating a spiral of higher prices, higher costs, higher wages, and higher prices again. Now, taxes can be proportional and can be progressive. They are proportional if they remain constant, though the tax base changes, and the tax base may be income, money value of property, wealth, etc. Meanwhile, they can be progressive if the rate of the tax increases with the rise of the taxpayer's income. Now, we need to be aware of minimalism and consumerism. When it comes to minimalism, it is the practice of consuming only what is essential. Meanwhile, consumerism is the theory that an increasing consumption of goods is economically desirable, an inclination towards buying goods. Yet another social problem that would definitely influence the economy is corruption. And corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. It can be classified as grand, petty, and political depending on the amount of money lost and the sector where it occurs. Now, there are three different types and levels of corruption. We have the grand corruption, we have the petty corruption, and the political corruption. Grand corruption includes acts done at a high level of government that distort policies or the central functioning of the state, making leaders benefit at the expense of the public good. We have petty corruption, which is everyday abuse of entrusted power by low and mid-level public officials in their interactions with ordinary citizens. And we have the political corruption, which is committed by policymakers who abuse their power, wealth, and status through manipulating policies, institutions, and rules of procedure in the allocation of resources and financing. Now, based on what has been discussed and based on your prior knowledge, what is the difference between good and bad governance, and how does good governance affect the economic growth? First of all, when it comes to good governance, we have a better and improved public sector. It provides and manages services like pension, education, healthcare, food subsidies, etc., and infrastructure. Good governance would definitely work on fighting corruption and ensuring that authority and power aren't being abused. When we have good governance, we embrace transparency, the right of the public to examine the process of decision making in government and politics. And finally, developing human resources and preserving natural resources. Meanwhile, when it comes to bad governance, citizens would be denied social, legal, and economic protection. A bad government would not provide enough services to the poor people, and this means poor or absence of medical and social services for taxpayers, and it would also mean exacerbating and making poverty, homelessness, and starvation even worse. Displaying political corruption, police corruption, and judicial corruption in the form of embezzlement, theft, bribery, extortion, petty corruption like accepting gifts, cronyism through giving jobs to family members, nepotism through giving jobs to friends, influencing the allocation of funding or other resources, and abusing a position of power. We have an absence of transparency, and there's a waste of human and environmental resources. Now, how can we achieve a sustainable economic growth? First of all, we should have open trade and free markets. We have to expand domestic, regional, and international markets. We have to increase competitiveness of enterprises. We have to address knowledge and skill gaps. So here we're talking about education. We have to manage natural resources better. We have to fill necessary infrastructure gaps. We have to work on policies and legislations that promote economic growth and stability. We have to increase trade opportunities, and we have to enable investment and sharing knowledge. One additional problem is unemployment. So, what is unemployment? Unemployment is used to refer to people who do not have a job, who have actively looked for work in the past 4 weeks and are currently available for work. What are some causes of unemployment? We have flawed investment system, we have flawed system of education, we have poverty, recession, inadequate development of agricultural sector, automation and new technologies, rapid increase in population, wars, seasonal variation where you would have a job, let's say during summer when it's tourism, when there's the season of tourism, and then during winter you would lose that job. You have slow progress of economic development, low wages. Now, what are some effects of unemployment? Of course, we have a loss of income, which leads to financial insecurity and worry about bills and fear of poverty. We have a loss of status because it destroys self-esteem and self-confidence. We have sense of guilt because we would feel that we have failed ourselves and we're letting down our family members. We have health problems because being unemployed would lead to serious problems including depression, anxiety, stress, and alcohol abuse. We have decline in living standards where the family would lose their home, and there's going to be a repossession of car possibly. We'd suffer from strained relationships because financial problems and unemployment would lead to stress, tension, and would increase the possibility of domestic violence and marital breakdown. Of course, we have poverty, and children would suffer both emotionally and psychologically. Some additional effects include the increase in antisocial behavior, where being jobless would mean that you have more time at your hand than you are capable of coping with. So you are likely to start abusing drugs and alcohol. You're likely to engage in crime and vandalism. There's going to be a decline in population in rural areas because people would be forced to leave where they're living in search of job opportunities and employment. It would cost the state because there's going to be a loss of income and a loss of income tax. Another effect is recession, wasting human resources, lowering the income growth, and having fewer taxes revenues. Now, how can this be solved? Well, the government should create new job opportunities and new workplaces to help generate job opportunities and decrease the rate of unemployed people. They could build factories to provide direct jobs for the unemployed. And of course, governments should implement better monetary and fiscal policies. For example, they can reduce taxes for new businesses until they are successful enough and able to pay regular taxes like other large businesses.